Hi everyone, welcome to our 7th and final retrospective interview for our Total War 25th anniversary. My name's Andrew Perry, I'm a senior content producer here at Creative Assembly, and today we're going to cover a little game you may have heard of, Total War Warhammer. So, without further ado, I'll introduce our guests, our legendary lords. Rich, would you like to introduce yourself?
Yeah, my name's Rich. I've been the game director for the Warhammer series, looking after the post-launch content, and prior to that working on many of the different Total War titles, which I hope you got a chance to play.
Nice. And Andy?
I'm Andy. I'm the narrative designer on Total War Warhammer, previously a writer, sometimes being known as the lore master because I'm a bit of a nerd.
And Ian?
My name's Ian. I was the game director on the Total War tentpole main releases. I'm now a senior principal creative director across various games, and I've been involved in more games, Total War games, than I care to think of now, to be honest with you.
Starting back at the beginning, I think it was 2012, was it, that you originally signed
I think so.
the agreement with Games Workshop? Back then, did you have an idea of how it was going to look? Did you have any kind of images in your head, what it would look like?
Yeah. I mean, for a number of years, the company has wanted to do a fantasy Total War because it was just going to always be great. And there were conversations with Workshop 10 years before we actually signed anything as well, but nothing ever happened. And at the point where the conversations started to, bear fruit and we were actually starting to make a deal, okay, what's this game going to be, starts really coming together. And so we're looking at the whole of the Warhammer fantasy and just thinking, this is huge. There's so many incredible stories, so many incredible characters, so much going on in this world. There's no way we're going to be able to just do that in a game. You just can't. It's too big to do it justice. So we started thinking about, okay, how we do expansions, how we eventually get that whole world as a single experience. And the only way really we could do it was saying, okay, we're going to do a trilogy. We're going to do 3 main games with a chunk of the factions, and then in between, as we go along, fill out the details, bring in all the other factions, with the end result right from the beginning was, and then we have an Immortal Empires at the end, where all of this content, all of this stuff, all of this work, this evolution, this refining of the experience can just be this grand, massive thing with the whole fantasy world in it at the end. So right from the beginning, we thought that's how we do this brilliant IP justice and make the game that, let's face it, when we're thinking about it as developers, that's what we want. That's what we want to make. That's what we want to play. And we just knew that's what our fans would want us to make and for them to play. So from the very beginning, it was like, okay, how do we carve this up in a way that, makes sense, that we can deliver it in the right way, and that ultimately, right at the end of it all, or not actually at the end of it, but towards the end, we've got the Immortal Empires, and then and that's where Rich and his team comes in as well, because we're making the tentpoles, and then Rich's team is working alongside us. We're all colluding, and we've got this giant plan that ultimately will result in Immortal Empires and all of the factions across this IP being realised, and a few more as well, actually. And as the relationship developed and the trust developed between the two companies, then we were able to experiment a bit more, and I think a lot of that happened both on the tentpoles and through the DLC as we've gone on. So it's it was the only way we felt we could do the IP justice and provide the game that we wanted and that we knew our fans would want ultimately.
That's one of the proudest moments actually of the series, was that North Star that you set about effectively having 3 jigsaw pieces to kind of bring it all together. And no plan always survives contact with the enemy, but we pulled it off effectively over 10 years, and we got there with Warhammer 3, and now we have this fantastic giant map, the biggest Total War map to date.
Yeah. I mean, we're all fans of the source material, which made it such a nice project, to be a part of. And when I think back when we were first working on the first game, the thought of where this could go, we had dreams and like wild aspirations, but I don't think any of us probably thought we'd get to exactly where we've got to now, with the amount of stuff that has gone beyond just the source material books, right? And flavoured it out. But our goal has always been to do as much as we can, get everything in. And we still like to do that even now.
Yeah. What was really fun as well at the beginning is a lot of people are already existing Warhammer fans. So there's a lot of excitement anyway on the team. And then a lot of us have dabbled with it or whatever, but couldn't afford to buy armies back in the day. And so we like, okay, well, now we've got a load of models sent by Workshop. And right from the beginning, as we're creating the vision for what the game would be and how it would work and how it would be designed, we're just investing in the tabletop. We're painting miniatures. Richard's painted about 37 armies and what have you. I painted about 3 miniatures, but and
Bought some off eBay.
But the point is, we invest in playing that game, playing the tabletop game, understanding all the factions, the nuances as a tabletop fan of Warhammer. It was just brilliant fun as well, but we spent a long time just understanding that IP and what was the essence of each of those factions, on the tabletop game, and how do we bring that into Total War? And it's like, rather than doing it with history, we're doing it with that. But the first thing is to really understand what it is you're trying to then create. And that was a lot of fun. We had a lot of moments fighting battles against each other in evenings or lunchtimes and everything, and some table flip moments, all manner of different competitive juices flowing. But it was a brilliant time. Everyone's just really sort of absorbing it, and Workshop are going, right, have one of every miniature we made, and people are painting them, and it was everyone just bought into it from the beginning, and so it just generated that extra buzz that just kind of fueled the whole thing throughout the whole thing, didn't it?
And throughout the studio, people went, oh yeah, I used to play that, or I used to paint that, or like, really? Okay.
Yeah.
And as you said, with all the miniatures turning up, here's the box, do you want to paint that? And with a new army to play, and everyone has their favourites, which I think has been so nice over the course of making this, that everyone's feeling like a part of it and bringing their ideas and how to further it. And we've always said like how it's organically grown, really. Yeah.
Yeah, and one of the first decisions was, okay, designing how the game would work and everything, but it's also, okay, what factions do we first? And it's like, because whatever you do, whatever you choose, there's going to be a massive amount of people that go, that's not my favourite faction. Do you know what I mean? So we go, so we had to break it down logically to go, okay, the first one's the old world, okay, so we've got the obvious factions there, and they all synergise really well, especially when we're going asymmetry, and we really wanted them to complement each other in a good way. And then Lustria is obviously going to be the second one, and then the third one would be a more chaos. So we planned that out, and quite early on we was like, okay, people are going to be upset if their favourite faction isn't in this first game. So I think we made it very clear early on.
Who's your favourite?
Yeah, Skaven, man. But early on we was like, okay, let's tell everyone that we're doing the whole lot, so that or they may not have the one their favourite faction in the first game, they know it's coming, so that kind of immediate negative response is like, okay, it's not the first one, but I'll get it eventually. And so that was kind of a message very early on, wasn't it?
It's the characters too, who's getting those favourite characters in. The irony is, I mean, a lot of people, Andy Hall only puts his favourite characters in. My favourite characters are Frankwell and Kurt Helborg, both of which, 11 years later, are still not in the game.
Yeah, well, that was just to spite you more than anything else.
Yeah, of course it was. Yeah.
There's obviously a lot of differences and steps in different directions for going into fantasy, but what is it about Warhammer that just worked really well with Total War? What already could you see linking up so well, apart from armies?
There's a Venn diagram, right? And, Total War players, Warhammer players, and the circles almost encompass each other. And I think Warhammer Fantasy, certainly at the 8th edition adaptation, which we took, was about big blocks of troops, artillery, and it suited the Total War formula just exceptionally well. You could ask people who probably don't even touch Warhammer, and what fantasy IP would you like to see in the Total War setting? And I think Warhammer would be straight up there. I think even more so than some probably big kind of popular culture fantasy IPs, because the way Games Workshop have deliberately designed the IP for players to collect these forces, and as Ian alluded to earlier, have these interesting battles. It just adapted, it's synced perfectly, really.
It's a world designed to justify everyone fighting each other all the time, right?
It is.
Because that's ultimately what it supplies for the tabletop experience.
That's absolutely, that's why it's
again,
so war.
That's perfect for Total War, right? Because we always, in history as well, when you're looking for a start position or a period, you're like, where is it where all of these different nations in conflict for one reason or another, and it's that space in time or whatever where any one of them can just go off and take control based on circumstances and everything. You know, it's a relatively balanced setup, and you know, you can just take one and run with it and make that the all-powerful nation. And yeah, the whole IP is set up that way, right? So the key is to then realise that authentically. But the natural connection between that and a Total War game was kind of there to start with, I think.
It's got a natural progression system as well, with different creatures and units that you could move up into and construct and have within your armies, which is a classical part of Total War. And I think the other exciting bit for us was that, to my knowledge, that, you know, the world of Warhammer hadn't really been represented. There's been pockets of it through various games, but not like a mass campaign map, which Total War is obviously built upon. So for us, there's like lots of grey space to go into there and flavour that and work with the you know, the lore within the army books and bring that to life. And that was just a super exciting proposition.
Do you feel like the campaign was almost a bigger job than the battles because?
A different job, right? I mean, we had the challenge of like, how big is something, and how's this big old Ragnarok spider going to walk up and down this hill, and how's the giant going to fit through a gate? So battle definitely had its challenges, but the campaign map was a challenge because it was like, how do you shape it into a form that actually is fun and playable?
Because that's the thing, it's the IP, but it's fundamentally a Total War game and a Total War experience. And again, the challenge is it still should feel what Total War is, but bring in that IP in instead of history. And that's where that detailed passion for what the IP is really helps, because you're just going, right. And I'll give you an example that in Warhammer 1, we're playing a tabletop, and I was playing the Orcs, and the Doomdiver catapult was an artillery piece I had. And it just worked differently than all the other artillery pieces in Warhammer Fantasy did, where you lob the goblin out of the catapult, and then while it's that, you roll a d6, and it scatters, but you can choose which direction it scatters in, so you're kind of homing in on the target with your roll. And I just thought that's a really fun mechanic to play in the tabletop. And we're like, well, okay, how do we realise that flavour of what the Doomdiver catapult is in the game? And so we talked about it. It's like, actually, we've got a kind of a first-person mode with artillery pieces where you can jump in, look for first person, and fire it and kind of aim a bit. So let's model that with a Doomdiver. So, you know, a bit of work and a bit of configuring, and before we knew it, we were firing this goblin out the catapult, and then you were literally controlling it with a degree of control to find, you know, homing missile it in on the troops. And it's just such fun. It's a gimmicky thing, right? It's not the core gameplay of the battles by any stretch, but it's that fun element that just goes, that's the flavour of what Warhammer is. It's a bit random, it's a bit chaotic, it's just fun, it's bombastic, and, you know, that's kind of what we wanted to get out. And you don't get that if you're not, as a team, all playing the game and all passionate about it and wanting to bring that out into a Total War game. So I think we just did that across the board. And, you know, the more people played and enjoyed the IP, the more that sort of stuff got realised. And
it's one of the first things we showed journalists as well. Come and fly this goblin.
But yeah, a tiny part of the game, but it's that detail and that passion that comes out. And I think people appreciate that when they play the game. It comes out. So
I think, and GW did want to work with us. A good example, going, you just talking about the campaign, is if you look at the old world map in Total War, it doesn't quite look like the old world map. We had to kind of warp it and extend it because we needed the gameplay. We needed space between the lords for players to build up their empires. So again, there's kind of that nice give and take between us and our licensing partner that worked really well. And testament.
I think maybe we took that for granted a bit, how important that was right at the beginning, because, you know, there are elements like, okay, well, Carl Franz has to be like this, and you know, he's got to have this. Very early on, they accepted that Total War is kind of an authentic start pos. Beyond that, the Orcs could rule the world. They may not in your IP, but we're not doing a linear story, but the start position is authentic, and beyond that, it's the player's narrative that drives it. And because they bought into that very early on, it gave us that flexibility to go, no, we can make a Total War game, and they're okay with it. You know what I mean? And it's because that could have been a real stumbling block if that we would have had to do something completely different.
Well, it's the sandbox, isn't it? Is that you get to the starting line, it's all, absolutely authentic to the way it's portrayed in the books. But past the starting point, the power fantasy is with the player. And I've said before, I was playing Empire and I wanted to take back Marienburg, those filthy secessionists. And every game, even now when I play, the first thing I do is bring back Marienburg under the rightful rule of Karl Franz.
So you do it because that's one of your passionate things from the IP. To me, it just makes good common sense tactically or strategically to take Marienburg, right? It's a rich region, and but again, that's sandbox, right? You can do it for whatever reason you want, and it's there for you to engage with it the way you want. And to me, that's the magic of Total War anyway. But
yeah, makes making the showcases a lot easier, that we can choose where we go and build those narratives as we go. So with such an established IP, was there anything you were kind of nervous that you wouldn't be able to get in, that you really wanted to, that you managed to make work and kind of surprised yourselves with?
Not really, to be honest. It's more about how much we managed to get in that didn't even exist beforehand. So we've managed to cover most bases, but we've actually added so much more with Workshop. And I think we were talking earlier about the relationship that we formed very early on and how good that was, that mutual respect for what they do and their respect for us and what we do. And as that relationship developed, it got to the point where that mutual trust enabled us to kind of work on IP together. So driven by Workshop, obviously, with them understanding what would make it work for us in a Total War game. And so that was really brilliant and a lot of fun to do as a dev, to be part of that. So it was more us actually doing more than we ever expected we'd be able to, just because of the strength of the relationship. I mean, we did it through tentpoles and we did it a lot through DLC. I mean, Rich and Andy can talk about a number of things that were done in collusion with Workshop that just worked really well and were really exciting things to work on.
Vampire Coast for me, because there wasn't no army book. There was a very even at the time an old White Dwarf article, but I was waving it in front of Rich's face, going giant undead crabs, and we kind of pitched the Games Workshop, didn't we? And they weirdly they said yes. They even said you may need to create your own character. So
yeah, we had the opportunity to do that, which was quite special, wasn't it?
It was,
and we were ripping off all sorts of things out there, what that could be. We did look through the arsenal of books and novels and everything that we could think of, and we tried to combine that with stuff that felt nautical based. I know some of the choices that we made maybe didn't quite hit the mark that some people really wanted, with like Aranessa from Dreadfleet, but we felt it gave it that pirate vibe, and it was trying to get that balance between pirates and vampires, wasn't it? But
yeah,
it led us to that point, as you said, where we had the one gap still missing, and we thought we'd go low key, didn't we? With an operatic singer from Britannia.
Yes. Well, when you create, and even Workshop starts from that place, you look at the archetypes of the race or the faction that you're looking at, and basically you kind of pull the archetype out and effectively personalise it. And there was a kind of an archetype, but like an operatic kind of mad person kind of thing that we thought would really work, and also it was a bit against the grain as well, and even like Luther Harkin, obviously he did exist in the IP, but it's not like he had a massive profile or even a miniature. So we took kind of the hints that Games Workshop had laid, that he was again kind of crazy with multiple personalities, and we kind of leaned into that theme. Massively,
and I think that's what we always look to do, is like, how can we extract the flavour of what this content is associated to, and who doesn't love pirates, right? And then when you marry that up with zombies and the undead, it really got all the thoughts and juices flowing. There was stuff that had been obviously created within that White Dwarf where it had been custom built, and that was great, but there were entries where there was no miniature at all, right? So that really let us again go off on a tangent and engage the Games Workshop and like the Leviathans and things of that nature. We sailed on like the hermit crabs, and then the little house it lives in is a skull, because Warhammer is always skulls.
It's a safe bet.
Always go to the skulls.
Yeah. But I think that our favourite one is the Necrofex Colossus, which is pretty awesome.
Yeah, and that's a classic example of, when you take a main range faction, you obviously go to the army book as your primary source. But for Vampire Coast, we kind of allowed us to kind of look at like the Forge World catalogue of models and kind of, it's pretty much one of the first times we kind of, obviously we do it a lot now as the army books become more thin on the ground. But at the time it was, we can bring in these big kind of big resin kits and digitize them and make them cool, and also very organically part of that roster.
What are some of the biggest decisions you've had to make, the biggest calls you've had to make in the development?
Well, to be honest, every day is full of loads of big decisions. But I think we were talking earlier about all the stuff that we were doing as a team with Workshop, and I think Cathay was a big decision for Warhammer 3, because, we've had the factions left and we're like, okay, we wanted to do chaos the way we did, because then you can really look into each chaos properly rather than making it a generic thing. And so I've got all these 4 chaos gods, and we've got two goodies or 1.5 goodies in there, and it's like, it just didn't feel too balanced. You can't be too dark. You've got to give people the light side to play as, particularly me, because I'm like that. But I think generally across the board, it wasn't balanced, and so we're like, okay, we need to beef up Kislev, and ideally we have something else. And there's this allusion to Cathay, and we're like, okay, it'd be lovely. And at some point, even during mid-development, around alpha time, it was like we were pitching to Workshop about doing something with Cathay, and they came back and just went, yep, and then worked on Cathay and then worked on it with us. But that wasn't like in pre-pro or part of the original plan. It was an opportunity taken. But that, in the course of games development cycles and all that kind of stuff, it's a massive challenge, because you're not only having to do the work that realises Cathay and do that with Workshop, and Workshop doing their stuff and the timelines involved in them going through their processes and us colluding, but how do you fit that into a project that has deadlines, it has milestones, and you're just throwing this massive chunk of the game in, way later than it should be, and so it's a big decision. Do we do that? And it was like we always felt the upside was so big, because it provided that ultimate balance between whatever faction you choose, you've got enough of each of that kind of light dark side of it. Otherwise, it would have just felt too. If you don't really like chaos, you've only got you haven't got many options left here. So
scary meeting, going to the map makers like Emma, our terrain guys, and going, oh, by the way, we're increasing the map by another third, and we're creating Cathay. We don't quite know what it looks like yet, because Games Workshop haven't told us, and it needs to be done in the next couple of months.
Yeah.
But it was a scary phone call, wasn't it? We came, me and you was like, we need Cathay. So we kind of rang up Games Workshop, and we were saying, our game's a bit top heavy. And again, we was kind of expecting a no, but they were extremely open to us straight away.
Yeah.
And then...
But then obviously that takes a while to come to fruition, and you're trying to plan a project that may or may not have it, probably not. And then, when we finally get to the point where yes, then you're working with Workshop to design it and work out what that is, and then you've got to put it in a game way late in the development cycle. So, but I think it paid off in the end, and I think it did help the whole game be much more balanced. I love playing as Cathay.
I was going to say, it's quite poetic that to balance the game out, you brought a faction in that is all about balance and harmony.
Yeah, that was part of it. Honestly, that's what we were thinking at the time.
That was part of the pitch document.
So does this mean Cathay is your favourite faction to play? Or?
It's one of them.
Yeah.
It's one of them. If I'm honest, I'm a bit
plain
straight, whatever. I like Empire. I like being the goodies in all these games. I'd play all the others, and I love them all. And obviously, I've had to. I've been, helping balance and refine them over the years. And I love them all, and I love the experience of them all. But ultimately, my personal taste, I go back to humans against all the baddies, and that's my take. But Cathay was that as well. Just yeah, I've played them all too much, really. And half of the DLC stuff you've done, I've played to death and lost half my life to. So
we can relate. We can all relate. How
What's
about you,
your
Rich?
favourite?
Yeah.
That is a tough one. I know where you come from, and I like elements of that as well. I'd like Bretonia in a similar kind of vein, but probably the one that scratched the itch most for me in like a turn-by-turn kind of get my head thinking and choices be made is the Chaos Dwarfs. And I think also because that was the one that I was extremely excited about making from like day one, the fact that we got to that point and it was that kind of, oh, do I do this, do I do that? Enjoying that kind of strategical element was like a really good fun one. And they were just fun just for us to make as well, in that we had to combine what was, I mean, the big top hats are from, I don't know when, Andy, like a long time ago.
It's
and
a
then
small man syndrome thing that
then-
Chaos Dwarfs have, but it's Assyrian and Babylonian kind of Persian, effectively.
But we blended them with the Forge World stuff, the more recent stuff,
Yes.
and like to have that aesthetic. But yeah, they're probably up there.
And we gave them their own language, which was
you
a
did, yeah.
stupid amount of work. I mean, for me, I like love Skaven, I love Empire. I really enjoyed the Tomb Kings, actually. I had really good fun campaigns. And actually, kind of me and Ian played a co-op campaign quite recently where we were kind of, you were Grimgor, I was Azag, and we were trying to meet in the middle of the World's End Mountains. That was fun, playing the Orcs, which I don't think I'd done previously.
We've just got so much choice, haven't we?
Yeah.
And
How many legendary lords now?
Over 100.
Yeah.
And there's still
Can we get Kurt
more
in,
coming.
please?
I
Kurt
know you keep
Hellborg.
asking. He's definitely he's on the list.
Good.
It is so weird having this conversation now and then having to put your mind back where it was at the beginning. Right at the beginning, when there's like a few of us sitting around and
That was the hardest
scrabbling
decision.
around.
I remember sitting in those meetings with you and we're like, well, what goes in on that first iteration and what?
Yeah.
And it was painful. It was
It's
so
really painful.
Like, oh, you
Yeah.
can't have this and that character and so on.
But yeah, thinking back now, and there's 10, 15, whatever years later, there's 100 legendary lords and the actual Immortal Empires map. It's like, it was always part of the vision and what we planned towards, but it's funny when you think back to how it was at the time, thinking that felt pie in the sky. It felt a million years away. It's like, okay, it's been realised. That's great. And the amount of people that have thrown so much time and passion into it across the team, and the amount of talent thrown into it, and the memories you have of that camaraderie of late nights and E3s, and all that, and it's being driven by passion for the game we're making, the Total War game, and the IP as well. And it's been a long old journey, but it's so weird thinking about putting your mind back where it was back then and just picturing that happening, and now it's kind of there.
Yeah, well, it's been like a quarter of my adult life at this point.
It's been about the 20th of mine. Yeah. I got that old now.
Yeah.
But yeah, it's
Good times.
it's been good.
So, looking ahead to the future, is there anything you can share? Any plans, any ideas, anything at all? Please give me something.
Always poking for that, right?
Always.
Our journey has always been to do everything. I don't know whether we'll ever get there, but our goal is to do as much as we can. So we still love to add more characters and units and stories and all those good things. We want to have this as a long-lasting legacy for players to enjoy and come to over the course of time. So we'd like to leave in a way that all the different races and factions have had some kind of touch up and attention, and that's kind of our goal, right? We just want to continue doing that for as long as we possibly can, and spreading a little bit of magic here and there. But yeah, I couldn't tell you on the exacts. I think we're just really proud of what we managed to achieve today, and as long as people still want to buy it, and as long as people still want to get in there and have the good fight, we'll love to add more content to it.
So what you're saying is it will just go on forever and ever and ever. No one has to worry about it.
He's not saying that, but he'd say he'd like to.
In our hearts, yeah. But let's wait and see.
So that brings us to the end of our retrospective interviews. We want to thank you all for joining us. If you have any memories that you want to share down in the comments below, please do. And make sure you subscribe for our future updates. We've got more to come. If you've missed any of the previous videos of our previous games, make sure to check out the playlist below. I want to thank all these guests today, these lovely guests, for sharing your stories. It's been really great. Yeah. And we'll catch you next time. Bye-bye.